If TikTok were forced to change overnight, most people wouldn't notice it immediately. The app would still open, the feed would still scroll, the videos would still autoplay, endlessly, effortlessly, almost automatically. And yet, beneath that familiar surface, something fundamental would have shifted. Not visually, not emotionally, but structurally. Because for the first time in the history of social media, a platform used by more than 1 billion people is not being reshaped by creators, not by users, and not even by the market, but by governments, by laws, by political pressure that operates far outside the logic of likes, shares, or engagement metrics. TikTok is no longer just an app competing for attention. It is no longer just a company optimizing for growth. It has become a geopolitical object, a digital territory caught between states that have finally realized something uncomfortable. Whoever controls attention at scale does not just shape culture. They shape behavior, they shape perception, and over time, they shape power itself. As we enter 2026, TikTok stands directly at the center of this realization. Pressured by the United States, constrained by Europe, and protected, yet restricted, by China, the platform is being pulled apart by forces that have nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with control. This is not the story of a platform collapsing because it failed. This is the story of a platform being dismantled because it succeeded too well. To understand why TikTok is now facing this level of scrutiny, you have to understand how radically different its rise actually was. TikTok did not become dominant because it invented short-form video. Short videos existed long before TikTok arrived. Vine experimented with them. Instagram copied them. Snapchat integrated them. YouTube eventually followed. TikTok won for a different reason. It removed the social graph entirely. It did not ask who you followed. It did not care who followed you. It did not prioritize popularity, status, or existing influence. Instead, TikTok focused on something far more powerful and far more intimate: human behavior. Every pause, every rewatch, every fraction of a second where your thumb hesitated before swiping away. Those moments, invisible to you, were signals to the system. Over time, TikTok learned not just what people liked, but how their attention functioned. The For You page was not a feed in the traditional sense. It was a prediction engine, constantly adjusting itself to what it believed would keep you watching just a little bit longer. This design choice changed everything. Virality became unpredictable. Creativity exploded. Anyone could go viral at any time without an audience. That randomness wasn't a flaw, it was the engine. It encouraged millions of creators to keep posting day after day, chasing the possibility, not the guarantee, of being chosen by the algorithm. Music labels noticed, brands followed, political campaigns adapted, entire industries reorganized themselves around TikTok's gravitational pull. By the early 2020s, TikTok was no longer reacting to culture. It was setting the tempo. At a certain scale, platforms stop being products and start becoming infrastructure. TikTok crossed that threshold faster than anyone expected. Songs did not become global hits without TikTok. Products did not sell out without TikTok. Trends did not exist without TikTok. Even language itself began to change, shaped by recurring sounds, formats, and patterns that originated inside the feed. For an entire generation, TikTok was not something they used. It was something they inhabited. And that is the moment when governments began to pay attention. Because culture at scale is power. In the United States, TikTok triggered a very specific fear, not because of what it was doing, but because of who ultimately controlled it. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company operating under Chinese law, and Chinese law allows the state to demand cooperation from private companies in matters of national security. For US policymakers, that legal reality alone was enough. It did not matter whether TikTok had shared data. It did not matter whether the algorithm had been manipulated. The possibility was sufficient. When TikTok's CEO Shou Zi appeared before Congress, the hearing itself was chaotic and often technically confused, but symbolically, it mattered. A social media executive was being questioned not like a tech CEO, but like a potential security threat. Then came the moment that changed everything. India banned TikTok overnight. More than 200 million users disappeared with a single political decision. The message was clear: even the largest platforms could be erased if governments decided the risk was too high. Scale was no longer protection. The United States eventually issued a clear ultimatum: TikTok must be sold to non-Chinese owners, or be removed from American app stores entirely. From Washington's perspective, the logic was straightforward. A foreign-controlled algorithm shaping American attention was unacceptable. China responded just as decisively. Beijing classified TikTok's recommendation algorithm as a protected national asset, illegal to export. This single decision locked TikTok into a geopolitical deadlock. TikTok was trapped between two superpowers, each demanding something the other would never allow. Billions were poured into transparency projects, US-based data storage, and public reassurance campaigns. But TikTok was not being judged on what it did. It was being judged on what people feared it could do. While the United States focused on national security, Europe chose a different strategy: control through regulation. Through the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, the EU introduced the strictest internet rules ever created: transparency, algorithmic accountability, advertising disclosure, protection of minors. TikTok became one of the first major test cases. Europe did not threaten an outright ban. Instead, it threatened something more subtle and more powerful: structural compliance. Different rules for different regions, different moderation standards, different algorithmic obligations. TikTok was no longer treated as a single global platform. It was being pulled apart into regional versions, each shaped by political priorities rather than user behavior. And this is where the situation becomes even more complex, because regulation is only one side of the pressure TikTok is facing. The other side is psychological and far harder to measure. For years, TikTok trained its users to expect constant novelty. Not just new content, but new formats, new rhythms, new emotional triggers. What felt exciting in one month felt stale the next. What once seemed chaotic slowly became familiar. And familiarity, in an ecosystem built on surprise, is dangerous. The algorithm, once celebrated for its unpredictability, began to feel strangely repetitive. Not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well. It learned patterns so efficiently that it began reinforcing them. Users who lingered on shopping content saw more shopping. Users who watched commentary saw more commentary. Over time, feeds narrowed, echo chambers formed, not ideological ones, but behavioral ones. This subtle narrowing of experience changed how TikTok felt. Not broken, not unusable, just less alive. And when that happens on a platform built entirely around attention, the consequences don't appear immediately. They surface slowly, in declining session depth, in slightly shorter viewing times, in creators noticing that something feels off, but being unable to explain why. At the same time, creators found themselves trapped in a system that demanded constant output, but offered diminishing returns. The pressure to post daily, sometimes multiple times a day, became unsustainable. Burnout increased, originality suffered. The algorithm rewarded consistency over creativity, volume over experimentation. And then, quietly, the balance shifted. TikTok was no longer the place where culture was born. It was the place where culture was recycled. That distinction matters more than it sounds, because platforms that create culture lead. Platforms that recycle culture follow. Meanwhile, advertisers began noticing something else. TikTok still delivered reach, massive reach, but conversion became unpredictable. Attention didn't translate into action the way it once did. Viewers scrolled quickly, absorbed content passively, and moved on. The emotional depth that drives long-term loyalty was weakening. This is where TikTok's commercial pivot became a double-edged sword. TikTok Shop generated revenue, but it also changed user expectations. When every third video is selling something, the feed stops feeling spontaneous. It starts feeling transactional. And platforms built on spontaneity cannot survive as marketplaces alone. At the same time, AI accelerated everything. Artificial intelligence didn't just create content faster, it flattened creative differences. Styles blended, voices merged, formats repeated endlessly. What once felt human began to feel manufactured, even when it wasn't. Users didn't consciously reject this shift, they adapted to it. But adaptation is not the same as engagement. People stayed, but they cared less. And that distinction is critical, because platforms rarely die when users leave. They die when users stop caring. Inside ByteDance, this created a strategic crisis. Should TikTok double down on commerce? Should it become a search engine? Should it pivot toward AI tools? Should it try to slow down and rehumanize the feed? Or is that impossible at its current scale? Each option carried risk, and the larger TikTok became, the fewer good options remained. All of this unfolded while political pressure continued to build. Governments didn't just want transparency, they wanted leverage, they wanted guarantees, they wanted mechanisms of control that platforms were never designed to offer. And TikTok, caught between incompatible legal systems, could not fully comply with all of them at once. This is the paradox TikTok now faces. To remain global, it must fragment. To remain powerful, it must weaken. To survive politically, it must change culturally. And history suggests that platforms rarely navigate that transition successfully. Around 2024, users began to notice a shift that was difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore. The feed felt less surprising, less chaotic, more repetitive, more commercial. TikTok Shop exploded. From a business perspective, this made sense. TikTok needed revenue streams that could survive political pressure, but culturally, the impact was damaging. Creativity slowly gave way to conversion. Affiliate content crowded out storytelling. The randomness that once defined TikTok began to fade. The platform still functioned, but the magic weakened. Then came the disruption TikTok was never designed to handle: artificial intelligence. I did not compete with TikTok. It multiplied inside it. AI influencers, AI storytellers, AI commentary channels, AI product demos, AI meme factories. They posted endlessly. They never burned out. They never slowed down. TikTok's algorithm, optimized for volume and novelty, amplified them. Authenticity blurred, trust eroded. Users struggled to tell what was real. Teenagers did not delete TikTok. They diversified. More time in private group chats, more time on Discord, more time gaming, more time with AI companions. TikTok remained massive, but it was no longer central. And in digital culture, relevance matters more than size. Inside ByteDance, reports described mounting pressure. Teams argued over strategy, shopping versus creativity, AI versus video, compliance versus growth. Executives were caught between governments and users with incompatible demands. TikTok no longer knew what it wanted to be. The most likely outcome is not a dramatic ban. It is something quieter and more permanent. Structural separation, regional algorithms, heavier oversight, reduced freedom. TikTok may survive 2026, but it will never be the same. TikTok did not fail. It succeeded too well. It proved that attention is power, and power attracts control. The real question is not what happens to TikTok. The real question is what happens to the internet once governments decide they are done watching from the sidelines. Do you think governments should control platforms like TikTok, or does that create something even more dangerous? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dive stories about power, money, and the system shaping our world, subscribe to Wealth Untold.